Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this second work group for the fiscal year 2023-2024 long-term heavy-duty investment strategy. My name is Matt Williams, and I'm the lead staff for the heavy-duty investment strategy. I'm joined today by several other CARB staff, including Jason Crow, the manager overseeing the document, and April Schmitz, who is also working on the strategy. We're joined as well by our partners at CalSTART, Jesse Lund and Jacob Richard, who have helped to put together some of the analyses that we'll be discussing today. Before we get started, a little information on meeting logistics. This meeting is being recorded. That recording and a list of participants will be made available on the Low Carbon Transportation Investments and Air Quality Improvement Program meetings and workshops webpage within the next 2 weeks. Today's meeting materials, including the agenda and the slides we'll be sharing today, are available on that webpage now. I've shared a link to that in the chat. We will be leveraging Zoom's raised hand feature to facilitate comments and questions. If there are Zoom disruptions for any reason, including malicious intent, we will immediately end today's meeting and send out another notice to reschedule. And lastly, we are unable to allow anonymous meeting participants for security reasons. Please make sure that your name is clear on the Zoom platform. If you are participating by phone and raise your hand by pressing #2, we will call on you based on the last 4 digits of your phone number. The purpose of this meeting is to share more of our preliminary analysis and proposals for this year's heavy-duty investment strategy, go over some updates made since the July 12th heavy-duty investment strategy work group, and get feedback on those items. We'll start with an overview of the heavy-duty investment strategy before CalSTART presents updated technology readiness assessments. We will share updates that we've completed to our market readiness analysis and metrics of success. Then we'll show our proposed investment priority areas for the next 3 years, incorporating feedback from the July 12th work group. As a reminder, the heavy-duty investment strategy will appear as an appendix to the fiscal year 2023-24 annual funding plan for clean transportation incentives, but the strategy scope is from fiscal year 2024-25 through fiscal year 26-27, and it does not make any funding decisions. All of that is done through the development of the funding plan alongside the legislature's annual budget. As such, we won't be discussing the fiscal year 23-24 budget or funding policy for fiscal year 2023-24. The funding plan process is nearly complete. The draft funding plan was released yesterday, and a final workshop is scheduled for August 31st. Please check our funding plan webpage, a link to which is being added to the chat. I'll pause here for initial questions about this meeting before we dive in. We ask that you raise your hand to let us know that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. We'll then unmute your line, and you may need to unmute yourself as well. For those of you participating via phone, please press #2 to raise your hand, and we'll call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. Not seeing any, we will continue. The heavy-duty investment strategy serves as CARB's long-term investment strategy for clean transportation incentives funding. It covers 3 years of funding and is updated annually. The strategy serves as a roadmap showing how state incentives can help spark private sector investment and create partnerships necessary to support the transformation of the heavy-duty on- and off-road sectors. It identifies key priority areas for investment that will help to ensure a smooth and continued transformation in the heavy-duty space. Each year, the heavy-duty investment strategy includes several key elements. This year's document will include an updated discussion of the beachhead strategy and how it helps to inform the extension of technologies to adjacent markets, updates on the current status of the advanced heavy-duty vehicle and equipment technologies, a further discussion of market readiness indicators, additional ways to report on the metrics of investment success, new examples of what's happening in the industry, an updated 3-year set of recommendations for heavy-duty vehicle and off-road investments, the ways CARB is focusing investments on the communities and small businesses in greatest need of assistance, and an annual report on the progress we've made towards cleaning up the state's school bus fleet. CARB's investments support advanced technologies across the commercialization pathway, providing a way for the transformation of heavy-duty projects to help meet our air quality and climate goals. This graphic provides an example of how incentive funding has enabled that to happen. The heavy-duty investment strategy we're discussing today is specifically for low-carbon transportation, which funds projects from pre-commercial demonstration phase through pilots and early commercialization. I'll pause here for any questions about the heavy-duty investment strategy generally before we move on to our fiscal year 2023-24 updates. If there are any questions or comments, please raise your hand or press pound 2 and we will call on you. Okay. Monitoring the status of key technologies is imperative to maintain the effectiveness of the investment strategy and track progress against goals. With input from grantees and from industry stakeholders, CARB conducts an annual high-level snapshot review to assess the generalized status and progress of key technologies to provide valuable directional guidance on where important technology platforms are in terms of technology readiness for the market. This assessment only looks at factors relating to technology readiness and complements the market readiness indicators, things like infrastructure availability or cost parity, which we'll discuss a little later. We shared initial analysis with the work group last month, and I'll now turn it over to Jacob from CalSTART to walk through our completed analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. If we want to go to the next slide there. Yeah, so once again, just want to reiterate that all on-road battery electric vehicles, that is, everything from a cargo van to a heavy-duty truck, have received a technology readiness of 8 or higher. And starting in the fiscal year 23-24, all those platforms that have achieved tech readiness will only be evaluated for market readiness. However, that still includes, we have tech readiness scores for all off-road equipment and all fuel cell vehicles and off-road equipment. If we want to go to the next slide, these are the final scores for the tech readiness for battery electric cargo handling equipment. As we can see, there's some technology platforms, warehouse tractor, spreader, autonomous guided vehicle that do not have scores from fiscal year 22. That is because they are new this year. There's a total of 13 new categories this year getting scored for the first time, which is very exciting to show movement in the off-road sector. I want to move on to the next slide. Awesome. Yeah. So here we have the battery electric construction equipment, and this is where we saw the most movement. As we can see, wheel loaders, light and heavy, as well as telehandlers, bumping up really significantly from late demo, early pilot, all the way to late stage pilot, early market entry, which is showing just the viability of those technologies or categories to perform with battery electric. I want to move one more slide here. Yes, and here we have the tech status snapshots for all the other platforms, which includes everything from agriculture to aviation and rail. As we can see, there is still pretty gradual improvement throughout all of these platforms, which is really good to see. Airport, ground support, heavy, and underground specialty, as well as the commercial hovercraft, all are scoring an 8 or higher, and therefore will be getting the market readiness assessment this year. Now, as we move on, this is fuel cell on-road, as we only have 3 categories. We have the long haul, the shuttle bus, and transit bus. While there are a few moving back here, we do see transit bus moving ahead. Just to say, transit bus will not be getting the market readiness assessment this year due to lack of available data to make a proper assessment on that. But it's really good to see that they're moving ahead and above an 8. As well, we have the fuel cell off-road. And again, this is very steady improvement going forward towards the more early pilot stage for a lot of these. So overall, we are seeing just gradual improvement forward for a lot of these technologies. And also to state, we are only showing the technologies that have a 5 or greater. So there could be some categories that are not displayed that scored a 5 or below a 5 this year, but we could be seeing them new come into the next strategy next year. And back to you, Matt.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview, Jacob. We will take a pause here for questions or comments about the technology status updates. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand or press #2 and we will call on you. Please state your name and affiliation before beginning your question or comment. Okay then. While the technology status snapshots provide an assessment of the level of advancement for emerging technologies, this can make for an incomplete picture. Market and economic factors can hold back what would otherwise be a technologically advanced, commercially viable platform. Being an important factor to investment policy, last year's strategy introduced a new analysis of market readiness. In this analysis, we assessed commercially mature technologies against 6 market readiness indicators. Those were production capacity, assessing whether sufficient commercial production exists; cost parity, evaluating the total cost of ownership, or TCO, of these zero-emission technologies and how that compares with traditional internal combustion alternatives, both with and without incentives; duty cycle applicability, assessing the ability of the technology to meet range, payload, and power requirements of common duty cycles for each application; infrastructure, evaluating the availability and ease of appropriate charging or refueling infrastructure; workforce and service networks, evaluating whether or not technicians capable of servicing these technologies are readily available. In addition to updating our analysis, this year we're adding a 7th indicator on supply chain. In public forums, we've received feedback that the production capacity metric on its own may not paint a complete picture. Supply chain disruptions continue post-pandemic, impacting all kinds of manufacturing and construction, including that related to heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles. The supply chain indicator to be included in this year's analysis evaluates on-road technology platforms for their vulnerability to ongoing supply chain disruptions and constraints. It asks questions like, is supply of components sufficient to meet demand? Or how volatile is the parts and materials market? We're using vehicle delivery time as a as a proxy for supply chain fragility. Because we currently only have that data in HVIP, the supply chain indicator will only be used in on-road assessments for now. Once again, I'll pass it to Jacob to walk through the 2023 market readiness snapshots before we pause again for questions.
Yes, thank you, Matt. And so if you were on the last work group, we had last year's scores up as we were continuing to score these out. So what you are seeing currently are the 2023 on-road battery electric vehicle market readiness snapshots. As you can see, the crosshatch in these indicates the improvement from year to year. It's in the legend right there. Hopefully you can see it on these graphics. And the one thing I really want to point out is the workforce service network is the category that showed the most consistent improvement year to year across all the vehicle categories. This is primarily due to a high percentage of OEMs offering training to fleets who purchase their vehicles. I also want to look at heavy duty long haul, saw the most aggregated growth as we've started to see some public infrastructure roll out in small quantities, as well as OEMs offering and producing this vehicle for not just pilot projects. If we want, and then we also see the supply chain indicator there that's is showing that we need significant improvement and attention to that. If we want to move to the off-road, yes, okay. So also want to say anything with an asterisk on the left-hand side, that is the first year receiving this assessment. So there's a fair amount of these categories, as you'll see on this graphic and the next one, that are getting this assessment for the first time. Since the off-road categories that are scored last year were already very highly scored, there's not really a whole lot of room for improvement, but we do see a few in forklift light and airport ground support equipment getting better. And we do see a couple platforms, warehouse tractor and those light forklifts with 100% at all categories. If we want to move to the next slide. All right, and then here we have a lot more here showing their first year of assessment. A lot of them are scoring a little bit lower. As you can see, production capacity, workforce service network, infrastructure, maybe scoring lower for some of these, but over time, as these come to market and scale up, we can see the workforce production and infrastructure really improve with those. There is still some spot needs for cost parity and TCO improvements on a few of these platforms, such as the skidster, the switcher locomotive, and the commercial hovercraft. As you can see, they're full 0% on those. If we want to move to the next one. Yes, and we also are considering displaying MRIs in a new way this year with radar graphs that you can see on this slide. The more complete the polygon is the closer the platform is to having no market barriers. Each indicator is represented by a point on the polygon. If there is no movement year to year, the chart will look similar to what you see on the yard tractor graphic, as you can only see the one line. You're unable to see the 2022. But if there is change year to year, you can see on the transit bus and heavy duty long haul examples how the supply chain for transit bus is moving up on that point on that axis from 0 to 25, and the heavy duty long haul you can see is moving up on its points. Supply chain, infrastructure, workforce, service network, and production capacity all improved from 0%, and that polygon is starting to become a little bit more full. We are considering the radar graphs as they have the ability to condense the data and display more information with less. They're really quick to read, good for displaying changes year to year, and you can see where and where not the changes are. We're able to display a whole row of pie charts that have the crosshatch into one image per platform. There are some drawbacks to these, as it can create connections, which can lead the viewer to thinking that the relationship between juxtaposed measurements, as infrastructure and supply chain, you see those are connected, but doesn't necessarily mean there's a relationship between those two. And they can become harder to read with the mole, as the data set that we use becomes more multivariate. As more years happen, as more indicators happen, it can get kind of messy to read. This is just another way to visualize year-to-year trends for the platforms, as we're always looking to improve the way we visualize data and scores. If you have any thoughts on preference of these radar graphs or the pie charts with the crosshatch, please let us know, or let the CARB staff know. And I'll hand it back to you, Matt.
Thank you so much, Jacob. We will pause here for questions about the market readiness indicators. Once again, if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand or press #2 if you're on the phone, and we will call on you. Okay, and we will start with Matt Schrapp. Matt, we have unmuted your line, but are unable to hear you if you are speaking.
Hey, thank you.
There we
Sorry about that. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Jacob. Just a couple quick questions here, and understanding kind of the readiness is outlined in some other documents somewhere, but it might be helpful here for the discussion if we can just elaborate a little bit on Jacob's comments relative to the long haul readiness, especially about public charging. And I was curious how public charging is being defined, public charging availability within infrastructure, how that's being defined, as what parameters are being used to determine whether it's publicly available. If you could elaborate a little bit on that, and then also relative to cost parity with incentives, if that has caveats attached to it, especially in light of some of the HVIP restrictions relative to fleet size and total available amount, that would be helpful.
Sure, Jacob, do you want to talk more about those specific indicator analyses?
Yeah, so I'll start with the cost parity with incentives. The assumption there for incentives, if you want to take the TCO question as well, we're doing it based off of the base HVIP incentives. There's no plus ups involved for fleet size or any of the other additional stuff like a refuse plus up, stuff like that. We're also taking into consideration federal incentives, commercial clean vehicle credit as well. So that hopefully answers that question for you on what's being considered for incentives. The other question for infrastructure, this is kind of outlined on the white paper that we do. We kind of have a rubric that we go off of, scoring 0 to 25, 50, 75, 100%, which we are updating this year. But basically, a 0% means there's nothing available. And the 25% means you're going to start seeing it in small patches. And that is kind of what we're using to go off of, using publicly available data and industry experts to help score these, and is where we got the final score.
Okay, thank you for that, Jacob. Just a couple pieces of clarity there. I wasn't talking about enhancements to fleet size. I'm talking about restrictions based upon fleet size for total amounts. Understanding the plus ups and the drayage enhancement and whatnot. When you start to get over 50 vehicles, over 100 vehicles, 500 vehicles, your incentive opportunity, especially under HVIP, is not the same. And the other programs, state programs at least, are scrap and replace, which might not be applicable to fleets of many sizes. And then secondarily, we're talking about public, and the white papers, again, a handful, a smattering of public facing. And again, what constitutes public facing? Is that trucks as a service? Is that subscription based, or is that pull up to the pedestal and fuel come as you are? I don't think that was clearly explained of what exactly constitutes quote unquote public charging. And again, cost parity relative to available incentives isn't so much on the enhancements, it's more on the restrictions. So is that taken into account, or is it just looking at the HVIP numbers and just determining that who is ever eligible is eligible and there's cost parity there? It doesn't seem to be the case in reality. So I'm trying to parse through here to help my membership understand exactly where we are, because when we look around the ports or intermodal rail yards for infrastructure, there's very little. I wouldn't say there's a zero, but let's say there's a handful of chargers. Literally, you can count them on one hand. And then the other side of that is for the cost parity is that A, you need to qualify for scrap and replace, and B, you need to be in a certain size threshold for a fleet in order to qualify for the full amount. So I'm not sure how cost parity works in those categories.
Great questions, Matt. Let me see if I can help clarify. So again, the TCO with incentives, we are looking at the standard HVIP voucher. As has been noted, depending on your fleet size will determine whether you're able to access that voucher, as well as if there might be a plus up or plus down of that voucher amount. Because each of these technology platforms just gets one market readiness score for this indicator, in this case TCO with incentives, that is the standard that we're looking at. So fleets that are larger that aren't able to qualify for that support from HVIP would not see the same level of TCO necessarily. As you mentioned, there are some other programs that are available for financial support. For this indicator, we are focused specifically on HVIP and the IRA Clean Commercial Vehicle Credit.
Jesse, I just wanted to add, the further reminder that the heavy duty investment strategy is removed from like annual changes to policy. Like when we use HVIP as a general proxy for incentives in these analyses, and there's a reason why we have two separate TCO analyses, one with incentives and one without. So I think we cover that situation where fleets maybe wouldn't be eligible for an incentive by doing both of those analyses, both with and without incentives.
Right. Well, that wasn't mentioned. There's cost parity with incentives. That seems to be what was highlighted here, and decoupling an investment strategy that it can go out for the next 4 years seems, I guess, misdirected, especially because there's not everybody is going to experience the same TCO as Jesse had alluded to. I think it's just important that we're clear that even though this is decoupled from regulatory policy, that the investment strategy for end users looking at what's going to be available to them when we see, well, there's cost parity with incentives as being highlighted as a reason why this investment plan is moving forward for the next 3 years, however many years, that I think it's just important to differentiate between eligibility based upon regulatory requirements, be it either surplus requirements or for fleet size requirements, that it's important to differentiate between two and not lean on cost parity with incentives when not everybody qualifies for incentives.
Totally agree with you, Matt. And that's why in all of these analyses, including the charts you see currently on the screen, both of those are included: cost parity with incentives and cost parity without.
Okay, thank you.
I don't want to belabor it too much, but just on the infrastructure piece, we are seeing public charging open. We will be publishing an update to the methodology for all this, so I welcome input on that as well. But we're not necessarily defining public charging, as you don't necessarily need fully public charging to support long haul trucking. We are looking at, is infrastructure available, accessible to fleets who want to deploy these vehicles? And we are seeing some public charging open to support those, whether it's the EV Connect chargers at the port at Long Beach. We're seeing charging near the port in San Diego at TruckNet site, as well as some of the subscription models that you mentioned, Matt, the new Watt EV Port of Long Beach site. Those are some examples of what we're looking at when we are assessing infrastructure for long haul. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes long haul as well as really any length of haul, public facing. There are fleets who will be solely relying on public facing charging infrastructure. So I think it's important that we differentiate when we talk about publicly available, that it'd be good to see where that exactly is in this process. Because if we're planning out for 3-4 years of investment strategy and we're just saying, well, there's some public charging out there, like the pedestal in the Port of Long Beach, or if it is a subscription model, whether it's Watt EV, whether it's Forum Mobility, Emanate, Terawatt, whomever, that's not necessarily what many would just consider public facing, which is I can pull up to the pedestal and start charging. There's also configuration depending upon, well, long haul implies a heavier class and potential need for pull through because of trailer or chassis container space available needs. Then I think it's important to differentiate what constitutes a quote unquote public facing charger. I think it's important. I understand your points, Jesse, and I definitely am not saying that you're incorrect in identifying that way, but we have these conversations. I think it's important for everybody, both regulated parties, regulators, outside investors, to understand where that quote unquote public facing charging is at in its deployment. I would want us to be clear so we understand what investments are going to be needed moving forward, because right now there's a severe lack of public facing charging infrastructure, especially with the regulatory requirement that starts in 4 months from now. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Matt. Okay, next up we have Christine Casey. Please unmute and state your name and affiliation.
Hi, this is Christine Casey with the Assembly Transportation Committee. Thank you for the information, and I do appreciate the alternate format view, although I can see how with more years it could become convoluted and complicated. My question is related to the duty cycle capability and applicability. You may have mentioned this, so apologies if I missed it, but what factors would influence the change of that number year over year? Is it mainly battery length and range, or are there any other considerations?
Yep, battery rate, capacity, range and payload are the main components that we're using to come up with that.
And I missed, maybe I missed the first few slides. I think because I was surprised to see that there was a lot of 100% duty cycle on some of the equipment, because I know that we've heard from from many stakeholders that the duty cycle is not necessarily one-to-one in, I think it was maybe the slide before with more of the cargo handling. Yeah, this one was surprising, but maybe the next slide is more representative that they're not quite there. When do you have an out year for when you might anticipate duty cycle capability to be more complete for some of these applications?
We actually don't do, these are not projections. This is part of this analysis, this market readiness analysis paired with the technology assessments are supposed to be like an annual snapshot of current status that allows us to track progress and just see directionally how things are progressing and improving for the purposes of, prioritizing future investments, but we don't do projections with these.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next, we have Brett Stevens. Brett, please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. Brett Stevens, Daimler Trucks North America. Wanted to kind of follow on some of the trends that we're talking about here regarding market readiness. But first, I want to get back to supply chain and vehicle delivery time as a proxy. Well, I think that is very relevant. I know that from my experience and our OEM's experience on the HVIP vouchers, much of the delays have been driven by infrastructure readiness. So I just want to highlight those nuances need to be disaggregated from the population when looking at vehicle delivery time as a proxy for supply chain readiness. Onto the cost parity topic, Matt and Jesse and the rest of the CARB and CalSTART team, Daimler has to respectfully disagree with a lot of these TCO parity statements, especially in the medium and heavy duty segment. If these vehicles were truly at cost parity with our ICE products, our order book would be casually split 50-50 or some other mixture with a lot more adoption for these vehicles, because this is not fear of technology that drives our customers' buying decision. It's fear of the economics right now. And in the white paper, I'd like to highlight that it does note regarding the TCO that this is a 2025 assessment. So in effect, it kind of is a projection of what CARB expects to have happen by 2025. And I'm curious, whether that's based on something beyond just price of the units and fuel saving versus ICE. And furthermore, the cost parity piece of it includes the LCSF credits, but as Matt and other folks were discussing, there's a lot of focus on publicly charging or public infrastructure, and LCF credits are not available unless the EVSE is owned. So there's kind of a bit of a gap there where in the TCO parity, you're assuming LCSF credits, but not including the cost of infrastructure. And then lastly, mainly those were statements, but my big question is, what is the operational time period for these units to achieve this TCO expectation?
Jacob or Jesse?
I would have to go look at the operational time period. I think it's around a decade.
And then, again, this is great work, and we definitely really appreciate having the opportunity to speak and discuss. And I know that Jesse, you've highlighted that industry experts were pulled in for these assessments. At any moment, Daimler Trucks would happily be either the grease on the skids or the cartilage between the operators and our customers who use these vehicles on a daily basis to further refine the model to understand what they see as TCO parity and the challenges that they face from the economics of deploying these trucks as it stands today, just so that we're all seeing the same flavor, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely interested in following up with you offline about that. I think I've got a note out to you, in fact. But yeah, would love to have Daimler weigh in on how we can refine this for next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Next is Ed Kruger. Ed, please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation.
Ed Kruger, Kruger Consulting, LLC. A question on the fuel cell bus graph, having trouble understanding all of that. In that just three quick comments. Lead time from time of order till time of delivery, probably going from 12 months to 18 months. Volume doubling between 2023 to 2024, and I can send you specifics on that. And three, the question of availability on liquid hydrogen will limit market growth until we have quick availability of liquid hydrogen at a reasonable price. Close.
Ed, can you just clarify for me which slide you were referring to?
Transit bus,
Was this the
fuel
text,
cell,
the
fuel
text
cell.
text status snapshots, I'm guessing?
No, it was a graph. No,
Not this.
it was really the last one. No,
Got it.
no.
The radar graphs.
no, yeah, it's the graphs there, right
This
there.
one. Okay.
Explain the curves there. Duty cycle has changed in that we've increased the duty cycle on the fuel cell bus from 300 to almost 400 miles. There's an option for an extra tank if you want to go beyond that. The cost parity with incentives, the incentives are still pretty good. Volume still hasn't hit it to really bring cost parity down to what a diesel is. We're still twice the cost. And production capacity, we can probably, produce whatever you need as long as you give enough lead time.
It's
Workforce-
sounding like just to make sure, it sounded like so far you agree with the assessment that's shown here. I think we're
Yeah, no, I'm having trouble understanding the dotted lines. Was that? you
so
wanna
that
go-
that blue dashed line, what you're seeing is that was the last year's assessment. And so what that graph would be showing is that there was an improvement specifically in supply chain between fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, this year's update. And then so essentially that the orange radar graph is the status snapshot for this year.
Okay.
And
And
also, just quickly, sorry, just to clarify, this heavy duty long haul truck graph that you're seeing here, this is for battery electric on-road long haul trucks.
we're talking about transit bus, none of the truck related. And
Yeah.
Mercedes talked very well about the truck stuff, which is far off in the future. Transit bus is now.
Okay, so from what you've said so far, it seems like our analysis on the market readiness for transit bus is about with what you're seeing. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, I could send you exact data, but the question becomes for transit bus availability for a hydrogen piece is availability of liquid hydrogen close. As it's hauled further, the cost can double.
Understood.
I also want to clarify that this transit bus graph is for battery electric. Probably should have specified that in the title. But
Okay, and it's nowhere does it show that on here.
Yeah,
can
thank
read.
you. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, as Jacob mentioned earlier during his presentation, we have not evaluated fuel cell transit buses for market readiness this year because of a lack of data. But it sounds like you've got some great data in mind, so maybe we could connect offline as well about
Probably
how
have
we might assess fuel
100%
cell.
everything delivered in the United States I could give you.
Okay, let's follow up offline.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. And next we have Paul Stith. Paul, if you can unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation.
Yeah, hey, thanks for this data and looking at that. So Paul Stith with Black & Veatch. Kind of similar lines to some of the other things about, I don't want to say picking apart the data, but there's quite a spectrum of costs involved. And I think it's, you have to be careful when you're using averages, which is I'm presuming you've pretty much used here for infrastructure cost. And somewhere with this opportunity, you need to dive into the customer side cost and the grid costs that are part of those TCOs. And then another big gap, so maybe I'll just ask, is what levelized cost of energy was used for this, for kilowatt hour?
First, I would like to the total cost of ownership assessments does not include infrastructure. We have a whole indicator for infrastructure that includes that. So with regards to the total cost of ownership without parity, it's just about the vehicle. About the levelized cost that was used, I do not know that off the top of my head, but probably could find that and get it connect with you.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then when we do look at infrastructure, I mean, ultimately, doing these sites one fell swoop is going to be the most capital efficient. So I just would challenge or worry that the early data is about piecemealing, the sites together, and we need to be thinking about what this looks like at scale.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And this will be our last question from Colt. Colt, please state your name and affiliation.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Colt Capurro. I work for Walmart Fleet Services. So I've got a little bit of a curiosity here related to your data sources and where this information's come from. Some of the figures and numbers that our team's seeing are different from what we'd see on a cost parity factor, what we would see on the infrastructure readiness and the production capacity. So I'm just curious on where that data came from.
We will be updating the methodology white paper. You can see what was done last year, which, as was noted, was the first year we assessed any of these technologies for market readiness. We are currently working to update that white paper, which will be published along with the heavy duty investment strategy later this year. But if you have questions about specific data sources, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to follow up with you.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid the idea that just pointing at certain figures as being wrong without understanding what your indicators are for these things.
Yeah, I will say, I think a lot of it comes down to there's a lot of diversity in this industry. And as Paul noted, we, for the purposes of these assessments, need to go with some sort of average. I think we can still chat about what that average should be, but a lot of the variability, for example, that's what you'll see under duty cycle applicability, understanding that all of these scores are not going to be true for every duty cycle out there under each of these broader technology platforms.
Yep, understood. Would you post the link to the white paper in the chat as well so we can go research that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do that now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colt. Okay. So the heavy duty investment strategy works to define the outcome successful investments should strive to achieve. Metrics developed for the strategy can be grouped into three broader categories: creating healthy communities, supporting technology evolution, and growing the green economy. This updated set of metrics is built on the data from CARB's successful HVIP and core programs, whose funding has helped to provide the benefits enumerated here. Notable findings in the updates from last year to this year include a new category of zero-emission vehicles in HVIP. In the last year, we went from having no fuel cell electric Class 8 trucks eligible to offering several new models from Hyundai, Hyzon, and Nikola. We also saw a massive increase in the number of eligible models in HVIP and core from 320 last year to over 500 this year. And as a good sign of things to come, we also saw an increase in the number of HVIP or core voucher recipients planning to purchase additional ZEVs in the near future. Clean vehicles and equipment continue to do work for operators and the communities in which they operate. Total cleaner miles traveled is approaching 400 million, while operating hours of zero-emission equipment funded by CORE nearly doubled from last year. New this year, under Growing the Green Economy, was an analysis of the percentage of CORE and HVIP funding that has been used to deploy vehicles or equipment from OEMs with California manufacturing. Tracking this over time provides another tool to measure the many ways in which California's investments and initiatives are contributing to economic growth. I'll pause here for questions or comments about the updated metrics of success. If there are any questions or comments, please raise your hand or press #2 and we will call on you. First up, we have Matt Schrapp. Matt, as always, name and affiliation. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Matt Schrapp of the Harvard Trucking Association. I apologize for not introducing myself initially there. Just real quick, on the duty cycle comment that Jesse had made, and all these numbers are very impressive, you know, and it's good to see some of those hydrogen platforms come online. I wouldn't call it several, Matt. I would say maybe a few. I think that's more representative of the 3 that have come on so far. But relative to the duty cycle and kind of that variability within the duty cycle and taking a catch-all, especially from the drayage standpoint, when we talk about cost parity and duty cycle, it's definitely not that cut and dry. I mean, cost parity with incentives at 100% for drayage being included with urban/regional kind of a local haul, as we would call it, I just don't think is accurate, to say the least. I understand there's certain definitions that ARB has looked at for determining overall operational capacity of drayage vehicles within ACF, but again, I don't know if we should just gloss over the variability. I mean, we have clearly, obviously, work truck and shuttle buses, cargo vans, step vans, medium duty trucks. They can all do different things within those categories, but drayage is not necessarily being identified as a particular truck. It's more of a segment, and within drayage, there's a tremendous amount of variability. So again, just for clarity's sake, and understanding that it's already been built into this, and the goose is cooked, so to speak. I just think it's important, again, to differentiate between what, especially from a duty cycle standpoint, when we're talking about market readiness, that we identify some of that variability within these individual industries or vehicle types. So again, not to belabor this, I just think it's critical that we're very clear about what we're talking about, especially because we're setting the foundation for an investment strategy. And I know we go through this every year for the next several years. So it's exciting to see the metrics of success. What the breakdown of technology is would be interesting to see, along with GVWR, and then location beyond just DACs. So maybe just some food for thought and thinking about how we communicate the metrics of success and breaking down what those GVWR categories and fleet profile types and vocation could help inform this discussion further.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And as always, we try, doing this visually on a slide. We're not able to include all of the prose that goes into the final document. I think we do a good job of really explaining the metrics in the document and highlighting that variability within that in order to do these easy to read and understand and interpret year-to-year data visualizations, that there is necessarily a degree of boiling down complexity within all of the data inputs. But I think we do a pretty good job at explaining all of that and pointing out those things in the text of the document. But I really appreciate that comment. Next, we have Abraham. Abraham, if you will unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation. Thank you. Abraham, your line is unmuted, but you may need to unmute yourself as well. Okay, Abraham, we will come back to you in a little bit. Next, we have Irving Negroni. Irving, please state name and affiliation.
Irving Negroni, unaffiliated. I do like this metrics of success, but one thing that I think could be very useful is when we're talking about the investments, we want to know not only where we are having success, but where we are coming up short. And so, for example, 198 million DAC miles traveled sounds great. I would love to see data from the DMV on how many miles were traveled in California last year as well, to kind of see, okay, this is, 1%, 10%, what scale of the problem have we addressed? What scale do we need to reach? Similarly, I think the number of future ZEV purchases looks very impressive for voucher recipients. I would love to also know if CARB is pulling those who were in the wait list and dropped out from their purchase for whatever reason, what the kind of critical barriers were that caused people to diverge from their technology plan. And the other thing, which I think would be very helpful, is instead of just tracking total investment of both public and private spending, a breakdown specifically of where that came from and which funding pools were most effective. So was HVIP the thing that was unlocking all this additional private capital? Was that one of the utility programs? Was that Carl Moyer? I think in terms of understanding that, knowing that we've been in sort of budget cuts compared to, 5 years ago, having that bit of extra insight as to what's been pushing the market and what's been sort of a nice to have as opposed to a need to have would be super helpful to understand those trade-offs.
Good comments, Irving. Thank you. Thought-provoking. One of the things that we're always having to consider is when we're assessing the success of these investments, it is not against what they could possibly do. Low carbon transportation isn't intended to turn over the entire California fleet to zero emission. So comparing the deployments of ZEVs through HVIP, for example, to the total California registry isn't exactly fair. I don't know that would be a helpful analysis, but we would be interested in finding other analyses that might show, based on what these programs are intended to achieve, where they might be coming up short.
So I think to that comment, like if, for example, there were, X number of miles traveled and Y amount turned over, out of Y amount that was turned over to the new technology, say, okay, X% was we need A% was driven by, the clean fleets rule. B% was driven by opportunistic use of incentives, and being able to differentiate whether it's the carrot or the stick that's driving the market is, I think, useful. And I don't know of anywhere else in CARB where they might have the ability to ask for that data as nicely as in the investment plan.
Yeah, so that's another really good point. Something that we've been looking into. We actually have this great research contract with UC Berkeley that's been going on for a little bit now, trying to really investigate how our incentives drive purchase decisions, really like what we, how much emissions reductions or fleet turnover that we can really attribute to the incentives versus other, market forces. It's difficult to do that. I mean, really, for CARB as a whole, it is both carrot and stick. It's not that one is really more important than the other. The two, it's difficult to, really attribute solely to one or the other. This also applies when you're talking about, how other funds are leveraged through core and HVIP investments. It's hard to say which begot which. Usually these are transactions that wouldn't happen. Maybe there's 3 different funding sources going into a purchase. It probably wouldn't happen if any one of those were missing. Like it's really hard to pick apart which exact incentive is the one driving the whole purchase. And I don't know that that is a problem per se. Again, CARB strategy is that all of these things matter. Our incentives matter, the regs matter. They work together to move the entire market forward with different mechanisms. So it's something that we think about. Again, we've got this contract with UC Berkeley to examine like the interplay of incentives and regulations, but it's proving to be really difficult, if not impossible, to really pinpoint what is driving what specifically.
Yeah. One last final comment. Sorry. I would also love if your team could look at the impact on how the interest rate changes have altered the forecast of, what kind of efficacy. For example, Volta got acquired by Shell, Proterra filed for bankruptcy. Some of these market leaders are really facing some strong headwinds due to high interest rates and kind of capital issues that are hitting the whole economy. And if that means, the technology is ready, but the companies are less ready, I think that's something which we don't really see in any of these program assessments. We just see, for example, there's this many models, but we don't know out of these models, how many of them are in companies that have runway beyond 1 year, for example.
Yeah, that's something I think that we can, at the very least for this year, discuss in pros. That plays like interest rates would play into several of the like market readiness analyses that we do. Interest rate is going to play into the total cost of ownership, the upfront purchase price. It's going to play into manufacturing. As you mentioned, manufacturers have been struggling due to high interest rates and flooring costs. So it does play in already. So I think at the very least in this year's document, we can talk about how rising interest rates, as well as all these other market forces that we're all keenly aware of, have been playing into changes in those assessments this year.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the staff time. I think honestly, you're trying to cover a huge industry with a lot of conflicting trends, and you're doing a very good job.
I appreciate that, Irving. Thank you. Okay, and we will come back to Abraham. Abraham, I've unmuted your line. If you are able to unmute, please do so and then state your name and affiliation. Okay, it looks like probably having some technical difficulties. Abraham, if you would, when we get to the end of the presentation, my email will be on the screen. It's also in the slides if you have those. Those are accessible on the website. Shoot me an email and we can discuss, so you have an opportunity to supply your comment or ask your question offline. Okay. A principal product of the heavy duty investment strategy, the 3-year investment priorities table details our recommendations for low carbon transportation investments beginning next fiscal year and organized by technology stage, those being demonstration, pilot, and commercial. With a new fiscal year now added to the table for fiscal year 2026-27, staff worked with internal experts, industry advisors, and this work group to develop and refine the proposed technology category priorities shown here. Estimated investment levels needed to sustain progress toward full market transformation goals will be developed later. We'll leave this slide up for a little while to give you all time to look it over. I'll point out the changes we made after the July 12th work group. First, recognizing the unique needs of small fleets and continuing CARB's focus on helping them transition to zero emission, we've added financing and insurance assistance to the commercial category for the next 2 years. As has been discussed in recent public meetings for the fiscal year 2023-24 funding plan and HVIP, CARB is exploring numerous avenues to provide additional wraparound services, and this item in the table is intended to be inclusive of all of them. Next, infrastructure remains a significant source of delays for heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle deployments. Our inclusion of temporary fueling in the commercial category for the next 2 years signals our perceived need for solutions that get zero-emission vehicles and equipment in operation faster. Finally, we've split heavy-duty long-haul trucking into battery electric and fuel cell electric subcategories in recognition of their different capabilities and challenges. Separating the two allows potential future projects to play into the strengths of each while ensuring both maintain momentum toward broader market adoption. I will stop here to get your thoughts on the proposed priority investment areas or hear from you on anything we might have missed. If there are any questions or comments, please raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, press #2 and we will call on you. First up is Matt Schrapp. Again, name and affiliation. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. This is Matt Schrapp with the Harvard Trucking Association. Just real quick read here. Matt, it looks like in 26, 27, there is no financing and insurance assistance that is being projected. I'm just curious if you can comment on that.
Part of that is honestly just how crowded that one is. I should remind, this being the priorities table, this is not inclusive of all of the project types or vehicle, technology platforms that CARB would fund or thinks is important to fund. This is really just highlighting the very top level of priorities. Would be interested though to hear from you if you think that that would kind of rise to that level, perhaps displace something that is currently in that cell.
Well, I guess time will tell. The pilot program for SB 372 hasn't even gotten off the ground yet. And also, the fleet size restrictions, I think, are not necessarily reflective of the need for this. So I imagine that it will be something that will continually be looked at as something of a priority for fleets who are eligible. Displacing, I'm not trying to shortchange our hybrid marine or zero emission or the switcher locomotives or having specialized EPTOs or anything, but I think that your statement relative to this isn't all encompassing, more or less. I feel like that the financing program, as is evidenced by the CARB on-road loan program that has been around since 2009, probably the most successful on a cost effectiveness basis for reducing emissions that ARB has ever done, I think should bode for its importance moving forward beyond just 25, 26. So again, although you're saying it's not an exhaustive list necessarily in 26, 27 for the commercialization side, commercial side, that should continue to be reevaluated, looked at, and propped up as a viable solution for people to get into this technology, especially because, again, when I look at cost parity, and I'm kind of going through the white paper again here, just to get a better understanding about what we talk about relative to cost parity. It's interesting because costs just continually are going up. They're not going the other way. And I think that was made pretty clear by our colleague from Daimler. So I guess you guys getting as best informed as you can, because cost parity especially, I think, is far away. Considering especially some of the things that Irving mentioned about, major battery suppliers going bankrupt or filing for bankruptcy. So again, I think that it's important to continue to leave the door open if we're talking about programs that have historical success, that they shouldn't be, I guess, moved off the list, even moving out until full rule implementation in 2025 or 2035. I think it's important to continue to look at that. So just a comment. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Matt. Thanks. Next is Irving Negroni.
So one thing which I think is kind of missing in here is there is mention of, zero emission facilities, communities, corridors, but as we start to move to scale, you end up having different problems than you do at the demo stage. And this is something that when you're planning for a site, it's not a linear progression of, okay, this is how much it takes for one charger, and therefore 2 chargers will be this, 3 chargers will be this. It's usually, you have power capacity up to X amount. Once you exceed that, you need different types of site planning. You might need different, batteries on site. You might need different load management. And because heavy duty vehicles are so different, I would say that there are a lot of really good pieces of software out there for, load managing between a fleet of light duty vehicles, but those solutions and, the software algorithms, the on-site controllers, et cetera, are not as up to snuff in the heavy duty side, where you're not looking just at vehicle miles traveled, you're looking at, loads and other things and being able to forecast. So I think there's a hole in this investment priority of software solutions that will be needed to help take people to scale faster, both on accelerating the design process, modeling out a full facility conversion, as well as how you can do the sort of fleet management software in these specialized facilities, not just the, actual battery and hardware in the ground, but the ongoing controller systems that are going to live on that site for the next 10, 20 years.
It's a good point. Yeah, lots of solutions are going to be needed. Of course, we've worked on infrastructure stuff for a long time, and having load management software and hardware solutions is really important. I would say that is included in many of these categories. I don't think that a software or load management, something like that, would be a project category. For example, like you've seen lots of our demonstration pilot project solicitations, HVIP, et cetera. I don't think that would be a specific project category, which is what this is meant to highlight. But that would be something included in lots of these, especially as you point out, these ecosystem type projects that are really designed to build out those efficiencies with larger scale deployments.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, like, if you were to say, I want to electrify every parking lot in California, there are not enough consultants and manufacturers and people who understand how to do those sites today to do that task on the time scale we need. So the software solutions, the planning tools, unlocking those efficiencies is going to be an essential part of managing the transition. And so the reason why I think it needs to be included here is I don't see how we get to our 2030 goals if we just have all of the equipment and it works, but we don't know how to do the site management piece of picking the right equipment, picking the right site, working within that constraint, thinking about the utility issues. All of that modeling software for the planning has to be there, unfortunately, because we just don't have enough humans who know this space.
Okay, we'll take that under consideration, Irving. Those are good points. Thank you. And next is Paul Stith. Paul, please state your name and affiliation.
Yeah, hey, thanks. And it's a little circle here of some folks who are passionate about this area. Paul Stith of Black and Beach. I'm staring at the temporary fueling, and I just kind of wanted to understand, we're seeing this a lot already, and it comes in blocks of 0.5 megawatt up to 5 megawatts and more in some of the sites that we're engaged in. What will be the way that you'll look at this and not double dip perhaps into a site? A lot of reasons why temp power is needed is because the utility power isn't quite there yet. And so as industry responds with these temporary power things, some of them will come there, they'll do their job, and then they'll go away. And so, while the, permanent assets get deployed. I'm just kind of curious what thinking is going into that. And then a really important thing is, what's the carbon budget or profile of said solutions when we're talking about generation? Everybody would love to carpet the places with solar, but sun shines during the day, so then you need the batteries, then you need multiple acres for that. So tell us about temporary power in that category, how you think you'll see it come to market.
So I can't tell you for sure. Again, this table is meant to really show directionally the technology or project categories we think are important to continue the market momentum. For temporary charging, I can tell you that internally, we're starting to explore multiple ways that our existing or future funding programs might be able to assist in these temporary deployments of charging or hydrogen fueling equipment. The details of that are far from worked out, but hopefully in the next year, we'll have some more information going through public process, all of that. So unfortunately, I don't have a solid answer for you. I'll just point out that, again, this would be for starting, this is fiscal year 24-25. It's just a signal that that is a project category that we think is important that CARB should explore, and then the details will get worked out through the annual funding plan process.
Great. And the carbon budget for those, is that something you're going to make part of the evaluation as you look at it?
So that would be a specific budget for that would be out of the scope of the heavy duty investment strategy. The numbers that are shown here, of course, not based on an actual appropriation. This is beyond that
carbon
process.
budget, emissions budget for said solutions. Like what makes the cut, right? Different air quality districts clearly have a lot of work to do and would push for zero, but zero may not be attainable.
I would say that it would be highly unlikely that a CARB program for temporary fueling would include anything that wasn't zero emission.
I love it. I wanted to understand how you were thinking. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Waiting to see if there's any more. There it is. Matt, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. I couldn't help myself. I'll keep this quick though. I was just kind of perusing the white paper again, and I'm just curious. I didn't see the exact definition of what's considered heavy duty HD. Is that just from the purposes, again, this goes back to lumping in drayage with HD regional urban delivery. Is that 26,001 and greater? Or is that's not just in the class 8, that would be the class 7 and class 8 category for what you describe in HD relative to the technology readiness for the urban regional drayage category?
Yes, that's correct. And urban regional drayage are trucks with a range of less than 300 miles, whereas those over 300, that would fall under the long haul HD truck category.
I was speaking more towards GVWR, not necessarily, and plus 300 miles. Yeah, I won't even go there. But so for heavy duty, is that class 7 and class 8?
Plus. Yes, class 7 and 8. Yeah.
Thank you, Jesse, for clarifying that. And I think even more of a reason to separate out, and I get it, this document, this isn't the first time we've all seen this. I know this has been brought up before, so I'll just reiterate it, that comparing a class 7 regional duty delivery vehicle with a drayage truck is apples and oranges. So just again, for kind of clarity, I think it's important that we try to parse that out if we're just talking about a range, or rather manufacturer's stated range versus effective range. And again, so many variables that can go into that, obviously, but the manufacturer's stated range being the justification for putting in this urban, regional, and drayage, I think is short-sighted in the sense that drayage especially is primarily class 8. I would say probably 98% of the vehicles that are actually in service are likely class 8. If not, they're heavy class 7s, but that is less likely, perhaps it's 90%, but just more reason to think about parsing out drayage. And I understand drayage is on a priorities going out for the next 3 years, which is helpful. In my assertion and many others, it's backwards that we should be incentivizing large fleets to get a secondary market populated, but that's neither here nor there. I guess that's for the 31st. But either way, just another reason why we should be thinking about drayage as its own category as opposed to lumping them in with urban and regional. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so this was our final work group for development of this year's long-term heavy-duty investment strategy, but we still have time to work with you. If you have any follow-ups, please reach out in the next 3 weeks. Our contact info will be shared on the next slide. The heavy-duty investment strategy will be finalized and posted with the final funding plan in October, and we'll take the whole package before the board toward the end of the year. I also encourage all of our stakeholders to review the draft funding plan if it's up, and attend the final funding plan workshop that is happening next Thursday, the 31st. Thanks for that shout out, Matt. You can find more information on the funding plan process and that upcoming workshop on our website, for which I've dropped a link in the chat. So that is all we have for you today. We'll open it up one more time for comments or questions on anything we discussed today. Please raise your hand or press #2 and we will call on you. Okay, Jack Symington, please unmute, state your name and affiliation.
Jack Symington, Senior Program Manager for Transportation at Lacey Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. Thanks for the presentation, Matt. I'm curious if on the 31st, or we'll have to wait till October to see, what proposed breakdowns are going to be for those different segments across the pilots, demonstrations, and commercials. Putting numbers to each of those sections, I think. Which really help with planning, and I'm not sure if that's your intention now or later.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the dollar amounts on this table?
Yeah, like how much for Z-Drage, how much for transit, how much for switchers, et cetera, or how much for, agricultural pilots, whatnot.
Yeah, so we'll be finishing those updates in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, this would be made public when we publish the when we publish the funding plan along with the heavy duty investment strategy in October, prior to the board hearing in November.
Okay, so will those totals, be at least preliminary on the 31st and discussed? I guess is there a public input process for that?
I don't expect that we will have those 26, 27 totals for the 31st.
But even for the FY 24, 25, and 25, 26, forgive me if I've missed this, but is there a proposed amount that will be given towards Z-Drage out of that 1.2 to 1.8?
Oh, I see. So no, there is no specific breakdown. That is on purpose, that there isn't a specific breakdown. Again, this is a guidance document. This is not intended to make actual budget decisions or appropriations. It's really just meant to maintain momentum in all these categories. These are the priority areas that we think need to be prioritized for investment. And then here is a large range of funds that we think is necessary for all of that to continue to drive momentum. But we don't do like a breakdown by category, and that's on purpose.
Okay, is that just done, I guess, yearly and through a separate process?
Well, so this table is updated every single year as part of the heavy duty investment strategy. Is that what you were asking?
No, I guess I'm curious of, when and how would the amount of Z-Drage set aside in 24, 25 be known?
So that's going to be actually part of the annual funding plan process when the legislature, if makes an appropriation, if they make an appropriation, then through the annual funding plan process are those sort of programmatic decisions and internal allocations made. So that would be the process that's happening concurrently with the update of the heavy duty investment strategy. That is the sort of thing that will be discussed next Thursday on the 31st at the funding plan workshop. And that is specifically for the budget allocation made for the fiscal year 23-24 budget.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Next up, we have Paul Stith. Paul?
Apologies, I didn't take my hand down.
No worries. Then we have Brett Stevens.
Thanks again, Matt. Brett Stevens, Daimler Trucks North America. As always, thank you so much for these calls. They're very informative for at least me coming from the industry perspective, and it's great to see the transition and the path that CARB is taking towards further adoption of ZEVs. We obviously have a shared common goal with CARB, and I believe I said this sentiment on the last call as well. We would like to see as many of our ZEV vehicles deployed as possible, and want to make sure that we're collaborating as much as we can with the policy and regulatory side of it from an OEM perspective to ensure that there's clear understanding of kind of what those levers and knobs are, so that we can see more of these deployed into the great state of California, and want to continue to work with yourself, Matt and Jesse, on refining any of those processes, messages, data points, you name it. We're here to support. And thank you very much for the time again.
Awesome, Brett. Thank you so much for making yourself available. Okay, seeing no more raised hands, that concludes today's work group. We will post the recording of this meeting along with a list of participants in the next couple of weeks. If you have additional questions or feedback, feel free to email any of us, and we'd be happy to talk more. Thank you all for joining, and have a great day.